Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the DLC Drop Podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome Susan Paley. Susan is the former CEO of Beats by Dre, one of my favorite brands, and current CEO of DropLabs, one of my favorite new brands. Susan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, John.
Well, let me tell you about a little bit, just the interaction I've had with DropLabs. I was introduced to your marketing by a friend, and you guys were so gracious to do a feature on me. And so before the interview on the website came out, you guys very kindly sent me a pair of shoes. And I'll be honest with you, when I heard about DropLabs, which we'll talk a lot about, this haptic technology shoe company, I was a little skeptical. You know, I was like, what is this? Is this really legit, or is this some sort of a gimmick? And I can tell you, when I put those shoes on my feet and I found out there was an app and how to customize the beats, the vibration on your feet, I was blown away, and I was an instant believer. And both in music and in gaming, it made me just so aware of the audio side of my experience. So I just want to share a little bit of that with our audience. But first, what I'd love to share is what your journey has been like. You have over 20 years in consumer technology. You've been with Beats, JBL, GM, Fiat, Quicksilver, many others. Where did this journey begin for you?
It's funny. It began, when you think about 20 years, you're like, where did it begin? You're like, where do you start? I was actually, like many people in LA, I kind of went to LA to follow the dream. I was actually in entertainment. I was working on movies, and I'm going to date myself here, but it was the late 90s, or actually probably mid 90s at this point. And one of the guys who I had worked on a film with had actually started an internet company. And this was, LA in the late 90s. And so what would happen is you would actually create like what we used to call web wallpaper for movies.
Yeah.
Right. You would create like a website, and it would just basically be a poster that would happen to live online with HTML. So I ran into him actually on the Ferris wheel at Santa Monica Pier. And I said, what are you working on right now? I want to get out of the film business. And he said, I'm working at this internet company. I said, I've heard of that. That sounds really interesting. And so I literally talked my way into a job with him in 1997, and we started building their business. And I absolutely fell in love with technology. And we were doing, we set up the first databases. We were doing work with, Hyundai and Mattel. And it was really fun because it was every day was white space. You were trying to like come up with solutions, and, it was like whatever you could think of, you just need to find someone to build it. So, and that kind of white space kind of guided my career of like, I kind of want to do something. And because I'm not a classically trained engineer, all I can come up with is ideas and then find genius people that I can work with to manifest them.
Wow. I think that's what you said last there with bringing people together is maybe an overlooked skill. I think, the book Good to Great talks about getting the right people on the bus. And, yes. I'm somebody who I've got a narrow expertise. I'm definitely not an engineer either by any stretch of the imagination. But I know some great people, who are great audio engineers or great lighting engineers or, great tournament organizers in the esports space. So it sounds like, did that original experience give you kind of a problem solving perspective that served you well later in your career?
Yeah, I think, there's an idea of initially when I was trying to, I was in basically the internet agencies were service agencies, right? We would try and go pitch business, and then we'd have to execute on the business that we pitched. And so what you don't realize is you're almost like a linguist, right? Because you're talking to the client and you're trying to get them to articulate what they want when even the language of those days didn't really exist.
Right.
So they're trying to explain like a business need or a business problem. And then you've got to go translate that need, make sure people have horrible listening skills across the board. So if you can actually listen, you're like 50% ahead of most people, right? Because most people will tell you what they want if you really listen, but they won't clearly tell you what they want. You're going to have to kind of interpret it from their language.
Sure.
And then you've got to go back and translate that into a language that your CTO can understand, all your engineers can understand. And so you literally are a linguist in some ways, right? And so there
Wow.
are
Yeah.
certain people that have that skill where they can talk to engineering, marketing, sales, operations, and they're very fluent in all those
Yes.
languages because they all need to be communicated to using different language, right? To get to the same outcome. And so you see, and it's funny going back, looking and working with so many companies over my career. What was incredible about my work with Chrysler was that normally, and they always talk about engineering and sales never get along, or engineering and marketing are always at odds. And Chrysler
Yeah.
happened to be a company that engineering and marketing completely respected each other and understood the need that they each served in the organization and could communicate. And it was kind of mind blowing to me.
Wow.
So that kind of linguism, like the flexibility in language and the ability to communicate was in that company in a way, which is why they didn't take a bailout
Right.
and they survived and thrived because that was sort of instilled in how they worked.
Yeah, no, that's a great point you make. The value of communication is just invaluable. So at Chrysler, who would you credit that to? Was that a leadership thing? Was that the people that worked in the organization, the way they hired, they got the right people in? What who could take credit, if you will, for such great communication between diverse
I
groups?
think in some ways it was run by Europeans. And so there was a sensibility around design, around marketing, how important that was, and how
Mm,
an internal inherent respect of like you could build the greatest car in the world, but if they can't articulate the value and if it doesn't look beautiful and sexy, it's not going to sell. And so everyone understood all the different pieces that had to go into success in a way. And there was no fiefdoms and there were no silos. I mean, it
yeah.
is mind blowing to me how even the smallest company, for anyone who's going to go out and run a company, you could have 10 people at your company and you can be shocked at the lack of communication. It's something that like people really are wired inherently to kind of go into their silo and do their thing. And so it's
Yes.
and it's really surprising. And so you think, well, we're all together. It should be so easy. And it's not. And something you have to work on. Obviously, that's exacerbated by the fact that most people are remote now.
True.
Um, and in some ways, what's been really interesting is almost like the laziness when you're all together in an office, it's really easy not to communicate. But when you're forced into basically a Hollywood Squares type screen with all of your, people, then you're forced. You're forced for FaceTime. You're forced to discuss things. So a lot of companies are, especially hardware companies, were very worried about like, how are we going to ever do something distributed and remote? Are
Oh, good
finding that
point.
it's not nearly as hard as they thought it was going to be because they're forcing themselves to communicate in a much more disciplined way.
That's really interesting. They always say necessity is the mother of invention, but
Mhm.
sounds like necessity can force you into patterns of behavior that should have been there before, but it was so convenient that you didn't really get into those patterns.
Right.
So I've had some experience with startups and agencies and then very big companies as well. Your point of silos, boy, I can't overstress that enough. I remember I worked at a very big company. We had marketing and we had merchandising. They were kind of at odds, right? Because to your point, the merchandising said, we're the ones who make all the money for the company. These things sell themselves, and marketing saying, no, they don't sell themselves. We need to reach the right person at the right time with the right message that fulfills their need. And I remember we would have these huge quarterly meetings where we would get both merchandise and marketing into a room, and it was simply just aligning the dates on the calendar to say, hey, we have this video game coming out. Oh, there's also a headset promotion at the same time. Let's pull these together to, have a bigger push. And it seems so incredibly simple to me. But the truth of the matter is the bigger you get, the smaller you have to get. And that, I think that's a problem throughout corporations probably across the world. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I will, this company will remain nameless, but every time I went to a meeting there were 35 people in the room. And, the studies have shown beyond 8 people in a meeting, you're really not going to get anything done.
Right.
And so once you have 35 people in the room, you're basically everyone's trying to protect whatever territory they have. They're trying to give themselves an excuse for being there. And so it's a guarantee that I would walk into that room, and I was consulting for this company. I'm like, we don't even need to be here. Nothing will get accomplished.
Wow.
It will devolve into some sort of like bickering among things. And this is a waste of time. And so, that's what I think is a lot of large corporations just, it's very difficult to, steer the ship because there's just like this inertia. The other thing that I've seen at companies, when you're doing really well in a category, you also have a lot of internal resistance to change, right? If you want to innovate,
yes,
because you can see like we're crushing it now, but like there's an endpoint to what this is going to be. And we can see it on the horizon, especially with the way technology is changing. So getting your team to kind of say, well, we're kind of fat and happy and we're number one in the category. Like, why should we do anything? It's very difficult in a larger company to say, no, we're going to go into white space now, because most people don't really love white space.
Well, it's pretty flabbergasting to me that you see a pattern across all industries. You see the number one guy who should be the person who's in perfect position to innovate or to see what's coming next. They crush it, and then their time comes and somebody just supersedes them. You talk, obviously Blockbuster, Netflix is a huge example of that. And you have it in probably every category of every industry. I've heard it said that you need to try to cannibalize your own business before somebody else does. What are some ways that companies can do that effectively to resist? I understand you do have the people who are at the top who are like, what are you talking about? We're crushing it. And then you often, when I was at GameStop, I'll give you this example. The founder of GameStop, this guy's built a $10 billion a year business. How are you going to tell this guy that what he's done doesn't work anymore? He points to the revenue and he's like, I just made $10 billion. What are you talking about? But this is something that happens over and over and over again. And then you have people lower in the company, if you will, who are saying, we got to change, but they don't have a voice. Have you identified a fix to that, a solution to that for corporations?
It's interesting. Like, there's two different kinds of leaders that I've seen in my career. There's people like a Steve Jobs, like a Jimmy Iovine, who there is no detail too small. And they, some people say, well, they're in the mix for everything, right? And especially things that they care about. And they get everyone aligned on a single vision. And they're both incredible innovators, and they can kind of see around corners and beyond what like people would see, right?
Right.
Then you have other leaders that are much more hands-off, and they kind of anoint like their group of executives, right? And the problem is there's usually not alignment between what the CEO wants and what his or her group of lieutenants are interested in implementing.
Sure.
So I've seen a lot of things fall apart because there wasn't alignment. One actually example of someone who was able to do that on a scale that was incredible was someone like John Chambers from Cisco. He had almost like, to have an organization at scale that large that everyone was tied into a single mission and really understood it was really unusual. Steve Jobs had, and Steve Jobs had it. Obviously, Jimmy had it when Beats was scaling. And so, but you have to have this like emotional, missionary, visionary, like ideal that people can buy into. And it's got to be much more than the bottom line.
Yes.
It's got to be like, we're here to change the world. We're here to do something really big that people can really wrap their heads and their hearts around, because it's not ever just about money. People say it is, but it really never is. That's not why people stay at companies. That's not why they work themselves to death. They're on a mission,
right?
Be it personal, be it part of the company. It's different.
Well, and Simon Sinek has that famous speech, "What is your why?" Right, where he talks about Apple, and they say, we challenge the status quo at every point, this, that, and the other. We just so happen to make computers. Do you want to buy one? And versus the other version of that, like, hey, you want to buy a computer? No. Do you want to be a part of this cultural movement that just so happens to involve computers? Absolutely. Where do I sign up? Where do I buy one? Where do I sign up to work for that company? Right. And I think culture really comes into that as well. I was so blessed with my first office job. I've shared this on a lot of podcasts, and I don't know if you know this story, but I ended up as a temp at a tax firm in Washington, D.C. That was my very first office job ever. I was on a skateboard tour for 6 months straight. I broke my ankle 3 weeks before the tour was going to end. So I moved to Washington, D.C. a month before I was planning to, with some friends that I had met out there. I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd sold cell phones. I'd sold vacuums door to door, all sorts of crazy, terrible jobs. And this girl I was dating said, "You should go to a temp agency." And I said, "What's a temp agency?" Because I grew up in a small town. I had no idea. And so they placed me randomly at this tax firm, and it just so turned out to be one of the top 50 best places to work in DC, top 25 best managed firms in the United States, and the fastest growing independent tax firm in the country. And what I learned there, I started at the bottom of the barrel. I was delivering mail. I'm covering the receptionist lunch hour. I'm cleaning out conference rooms after meetings. I wasn't in the meetings. I was cleaning up after and before people back then. But it was such a tremendous culture. You know, I had a direct relationship with the head of the organization, the CMO, as well as the partners. And what it showed me was that an office job could be a positive experience. And that encouraged me to go back to get my marketing degree at Sacramento State and then, pursue the path that I'm on now. But talk a little bit about culture. You mentioned that there's these things beyond money that make people want to work for you or stay at a company. What have you found that's successful to build positive culture at a corporation?
I mean, for me, I think about what are things that I want. I want autonomy. I want, a way. I want the ability to create. I want to be able to experiment. I think it's all about collaboration. You celebrate people's wins. Know that it's not ever one person that can do everything. It's about the culmination. And we talk a lot, at DropLabs, I used to always talk about, we're building a system. And so it's a lot about the energy. I mean, we're all about energy, right? And moving energy into the body. So if you think about when you're building a product that's going to physically touch someone, the energy, and maybe I've been in LA too long, but of like what goes into that product, right? It's like how the team works together, how, and so a lot of times, like what I'll do is when I'm hiring for engineering positions, I'm the last person that they interview with, because if the rest of the team doesn't want to work with that person, then it doesn't matter how good I think that person is, because when something goes wrong or there's like a problem, people aren't going to jump in to help that person in the same way.
Right.
Also, it's going to be that energy is going to get reflected in the product. Like it's about the synergy and the chemistry of the people working together will impact, whether it's a piece of software, a piece of hardware, whatever it is, it will always find its way into the product. And so to me, the biggest thing is like, can you get, and I was also blessed with one of my first startups is that, it was a group of guys out of UCLA's electrical engineering firm. They had all worked together. They'd all gone to UCLA. They were brilliant guys and they lived together. They worked together. I mean, they were really a team and a community that was coming together to solve this need that they wanted, where they wanted to play all their music in their car. And this was, MP3s before iPod. It was worth money. And so it was sort of extraordinary to see. And there's still, an email thread that goes on, 10 years later with these same people.
That's incredible. I think when you really care about the people who are working next to you, it makes a massive difference. I've been in, like I said, some big corporations, and when you don't like somebody, like you might still, be ethical. So you're doing your job and you're making sure things get done. But you're not going to push that extra mile. You're not going to stay late. You might stay late because you believe you want to make sure you don't lose your job, or maybe you believe in the product. But if you believe and support the person who's next to you and you want to make sure that they succeed, that's just another level of dedication.
Absolutely. And things are going to go sideways and things are going to be problematic. And so when you actually work together, because otherwise it's really easy to do the blame game. Oh, I don't really like this person, so it's got to be their fault.
Right.
Right. And then you can't find the solution in the same way. Right. So like having that team be able to work really well together, really respect each other,
Hmm.
and really, you're in the bunker together, right? Like
Yeah.
whatever you're building doesn't matter. So you better, you better like those people in the bunker with you.
Right. And
It's going
also,
to reflect itself in the product.
very true. You also can only control yourself. So I talk to a lot of college classes and stuff. And one of the things I share is a lot of business comes down to, are you cool to hang out with? Like, can we get along if we're working a long weekend together because we have to meet this deadline? Is that going to be enjoyable? It's probably a bonus if you're funny, right? But also,
Mm.
if a deal is going to go sideways, if, like, this happens all the time. You agree on a scope of work, whether it's, you and a partner, and it doesn't result in something. Okay, can we work together to find a solution that's going to benefit both of us? Or are we going to yell at each other and sue each other and have this whole blow up? A lot of it has to, you want to work with great people, but you also have to ensure that you're a great person to work with and collaborate with as well. And then people are just, that helps with networking. Then people want to support you, whether it's you stay there or you go on to another venture.
And it's funny because it kind of changes. There's the beer test, right? Which is like what you do in your 20s
Hmm.
and early 30s. And then as you have children, you're like, I don't really care about the beer test anymore because I need to get back and, deal with my family.
Right.
So what it becomes is like, like, does this person have the skills that is necessary so that I like feel confident and comfortable working with them? Like I know what I'm good at, like, and this could be for engineering, could be for anything. And I want this person to be really good at this other thing
Hmm.
and know that because we know we need the skill set. This happens a lot with firmware engineers, right? Like firmware is kind of one of the hardest things to hire for.
Okay.
And so it's really about not is this person cool anymore, but like, does this person, are they going to get it done in a way and really build the architecture in the way that we need it to get done? So like your litmus test changes
Yeah.
as your career path like evolves,
True.
but it's always the same thing. So what's important is starts to get a little bit different, like your qualifications. But again, it's critical that you have confidence and respect
Mm,
in the person that you're going to be sitting in that bunker with.
absolutely. So we talked a little bit about this company that you started with, and then we mentioned Chrysler. So after this internet company, what was your next step in your journey?
So, like you, I said, you know what? I don't know a lot about marketing. And so I need to go get my sort of marketing like understanding. So I went to go work at a branding agency called Siegel and Gale, which is one of the big sort of branding companies, along with like a Landor and people like that. And it was a really great education into like what is brand,
Hmm.
how do you value brands, how do you develop brands. And so it really gave me the like foundational learning and the language to like really understand the power that brand plays and the power of words
Hmm.
around that and communication. And from there I went to the they call accelerators now. They used to be called incubators. So in the sort of
Okay. Yeah.
2000 heyday. And so LA had a lot of incubators that were popping up. And I went to one, and because they had this idea that we could bring in like a management team and almost like easy bake oven these, startups, right? They'd go in one side, we'd add a special ingredients, they come out the other side, they were a company. And they
Sure.
realized, oh, that's not going to work. It's really hard to build a company. And these guys were wealthy and they were older, and they're like, you know what? No, we're going to do Series B investments only. Like this early stage
Hmm.
stuff is just, it's too hard for us. And through that, I met these guys out of UCLA's double electrical engineering lab, the master's lab, who had this idea for MP3s and how they could play, how they had thousands of MP3s and no way to play them in their car, which is where 70% of music used to be listened to.
Right.
So they were pitching it as this hardware. I'm like, no, 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 it's really software. And so what they had done, and they were kind of brilliant, they took they reverse engineered all the automotive protocols. And instead of having a 6-disc CD changer in the trunk, you actually had what they call the fat box, and you had a removable hard drive, the first removable hard drives that were ever in the car.
Hmm.
And instead of 6 CDs, you put in thousands of songs.
Right.
And it was a really innovative company. It was really born because they were like, we want to listen to all of our MP3s. And we ended up I did the first digital content deals for the car ever with like Capcom and Nickelodeon
Cool.
and Universal Music. And it was this really fun thing where I'm on the phone with all these lawyers. And I said, okay, well, we want to do something in the car. So we were actually selling our system to GM at this point. We had music in the front and we had video in the back. And it was all about, well, we want to unlock these tracks, or unlock, like, show promos. We have a special code, and then you could actually buy a pack of Capcom games, or you could buy,
Sure.
Universal Music. And we were on the phone. We're like, okay, well, and the lawyer's like, well, how should we do this? And we're like, well, this is kind of what we want to do. And it was really fun because you're all like, we want to do something. There's no precedent. So let's make it up. And what you'll find throughout most of your career is there's a lot of let's make it up.
Absolutely.
Like there's no playbook. Everyone's looking for a playbook.
Right.
And there really isn't a playbook because everything is so different. And so you are kidding yourself if you don't spend a bunch of your time making things up and trying to make the best decisions that you can. And that's the fun stuff, the creative.
That's super funny because when I was growing up, I always thought that there was a playbook. I'm always like, people just know what they're doing. How do I figure out what they know? How do I find the playbook, right? And I do believe that there's some people who know, people know a certain amount, right? You've got your experience that you can look back on, but there's such a value in resourcefulness. There's some people who are order takers and they're great, maybe project managers, or they're great at operating. And there's a very significant value for that. But also, some people like that, they need to be told what to do, or there needs to be a roadmap. But I think there's such value in resourcefulness for somebody to say, go figure it out. No one's done this before. Let's see what happens. And for me, I think people like you and myself, that's exciting, right? It's like, oh my gosh, to do something that's never been done, I'm all about it.
Yeah. And like I said, that's why people, or, there's that thing of imposter syndrome, right? Like where's my playbook, right? And so it's, again, in resourcefulness and resilience, that's what building a company is about, whether you're building one or you're like running a division within a company, because things are going to go wrong. And there is so much that you cannot control, even in best situation, right? There are just, look at what the world we're living in right now. No one could have foretold where we are, right? So you have to be resilient. You have to be adaptable. And it's as much about problem solving as creating.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a guest previously, and she said, all of the, in 2020, she speaks a lot of conferences. And so, the conference industry has obviously been turned on its head. And you were talking earlier about necessity be the mother of invention. Sometimes you don't know that you have that ability to shift or be resourceful until you need it sometimes. And I think, there's been a lot of craziness happening in 2020, but as we look forward to 2021, one of my hopes is that people realize, wow, I am resourceful. I am creative. I can make it through anything because I made it through this insane year that turned every industry on its head.
Yeah, I mean, look at what people are, would you ever think the United States, most people are wearing masks almost everywhere they go. And, and it just becomes, that's never been in our culture. And I think you'll see that there'll be, everyone's like, when's it going back to normal? Well, it's the normal is going to be a new normal. It's not going to be the old normal. But again, people are adapting. They're adapting because they have to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I want to hear a little bit about how you got involved with Beats by Dre. I think it's such a cultural phenomenon. I have a Beats pill. I've got the headphones.
The pill stories.
What's that?
No, I get the pill. I just remember, the pill is an amazing product. And I just remember working with one of the factories and saying we were just fighting about something in China. And I'm like, I know it's really tense now, but I'm telling you, we'll be cracking the champagne when this is over. It's going to be great. And, it's just, and of course, and we're still good friends today. He's like, I can't, what we went through to get to where what it became was, it was a lot of work.
I bet, actually something that I think back on when I got that shoes of DropLab shoes that your team sent me, I didn't know you yet. I just knew Angela from marketing, and I didn't know that you had been part of Beats in the past. But now that I'm thinking back on it, what blew me away with both Beats and DropLabs was the packaging of the product. Was that something that you had a hand in, or something that you've just worked with people who had a hand in? Or because I was blown away by both. They're both very elaborate boxes. I remember DropLabs, you open it, it's this real shiny material that's beautiful, and it makes you almost as excited about opening that box as it does the product. And I think that can be overlooked in a lot of ways, is the feeling around the product that involves packaging.
Yeah, I mean, Beats was so I was heavily involved in the Beats packaging. I didn't design it, and that was really the kudos go to Robert Bruner and most of the industrial design, everything. I mean, he is an absolute genius.
Yeah.
But it was where I really learned working with Robert for those few years of how important every touch point is
Mm,
and how to really obsess about details, especially when you have things that are going to touch people, right? It's like, Beats, you're wearing it on your body, or shoes, you're wearing them on your body. And so
yeah.
you can't, nothing should be overlooked. And so this whole idea of like the consumer journey, right? And then, it's a premium product. And so you're giving yourself a gift or you're giving that gift to others. And so I think Beats would really revolutionize. I mean, before Beats packaging, everything was like those horrible vacuum seals that like cut yourself, like when you're trying to open them and you try and get
Right.
scissors, the plastic. And Beats really made it about, it's about that first experience. That's your first touch point with the brand. And so that became kind of my mantra of like, we need to create an experience. It's something that no one's ever experienced before. They don't even really know what it is until they put it on. And so you want that anticipation, that excitement, and you want people to feel like, hey, we're giving you a gift you're giving yourself, a gift you're giving someone else. Doesn't really matter,
Sure.
but it should feel like that.
Yeah, that's incredible because when you do have that premium packaging, number one, if you have a premium product, it validates it a little bit, right? You're like opening this thing, you're like, oh my goodness, this is why maybe it costs a little more than the headphones next to it or the shoes next to it or something like that. It also becomes a fashion statement, I guess you could say. I love watching skate videos, and so the other day I was watching all these Tampa Pro Skate Park of Tampa contests, and I think it was 2014, 2015. All the winners had gold Beats by Dre draped around their necks, and it was a cool thing. I remember, around that time, just walking around with those around your neck, even when you're not listening to the music, is something that is a fashion statement and positions you
And
culturally.
that had never happened before. I mean, when Beats started, there was no market for on or over ear phones. It was really about, I'm sorry, there was no consumer market. The on or
Mm,
over ear headphone market was really prosumer only.
yeah.
And so for consumer, it was in ear. And they really revolutionized all of it. And it's funny because then it's kind of a 10-year cycle. And then all of a sudden AirPods. So it was a reaction to earbuds. And
Okay.
now AirPods have been like sort of the new earbud.
Right.
And now Apple, 10 years now, has said, okay, you know what? I think there's a market again for on or over ear. Like they just launched a really premium headphone that's doing incredibly well. It's an over ear headphone.
Hmm.
So but it is fashion. And so for us with DropLabs, we really kind of did a hybrid where we worked with a lot of different, shoe designers,
Yeah.
but we made it all black because we didn't want to get into the color game. And so someone said, hey, the minute you put a color on something, you are making a fashion statement. And so for our goal, and this is what I learned
Interesting.
at Beats actually, all of the different designs that we had a company early on called Colorware. It was not our company. It was a Minnesota company. And they would take Beats early days and they would actually buy them or put them into Colorware, and Colorware would customize them.
Oh,
And they were
interesting.
literally putting them through an oven, which was ridiculous. Like you're putting electronics through an oven to
Right.
add like sort of the water transfer. So we were like, well, why should they have that business? This is clearly a need where people want to feel unique. They want to have it reflect who they are. So we started
Yeah.
really doing it ourselves of like special lines that would be for football team, a football club in Europe, it was, and so that really became like the gold Beats you're seeing, right? That's a special limited edition. People want exclusivity. They want customization. They want the ability to reflect their own personality. So what you
Yeah.
see with DropLabs is there'll be some collaborations coming on that will really be about reflective of the product. And what's interesting about how this product can change, at least our product, is not just how it looks physically,
Hmm.
but all the software can change, all the tuning. All of the
Yes.
applications can reflect, what that person is. So if it's a gamer and they want to have like custom settings for different games,
Right.
they can create that, right? They can create, we have the ability for the shoes to become a controller. So you can bind settings to a keyboard,
That's cool.
right? So now I can do inputs. So I can tap my foot, tap my toe, tap my heel, go on your sides, look around a corner. And again, that all can be architected by a collaborator. And so that's what I think the future of collaboration
Hmm.
is really about. How do you create not just a different color version, but a custom experience
Mm,
that really
I
reflects
love
who
that.
that person is as a brand? Because I think that's where, there's a level of sophistication now where people are expecting. I mean, you could say like, Mark Andreessen likes, or software is eating the world.
Right.
So there's no such thing as hardware versus software. I mean, hardware is just software embedded, right? That like is physical.
Sure.
So the ability for people to do collaborations that really create an experience
Mm.
that is beyond software, beyond hardware, beyond a specific product, that's a consumer experience that is imbued with their own brand.
Yeah, and we know young people value experiences more than owning products, which can be a problem if you sell products. But in your case, if by selling your products, you're enhancing experiences and then providing customization as a result to go another layer deeper, that's really powerful.
Yeah, and that's really the power of software.
Well, and there's another experience that I wanted to talk with you because I wasn't aware of this when I first found out about Drop Labs. But when I learned about the positive aspects for the deaf with DropLabs. I know there's a gamer who's deaf. I don't know if she's publicly part of
Ewok.
Ewok is amazing. I saw when FaZe brought her on, it completely
Yeah.
changed the vibe of the entire org. And she's so cool. She's so talented. She's so fun. From what I understand, she comes from a multi-generation line of deaf people.
5 generations.
It's incredible. And
It's incredible.
when I felt the shoes, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I was blown away. It was far beyond what I thought it was going to be. But when I learned about the deaf aspect and learned that, wow, this product can enable people who can't hear to interact with music and video games in ways that they never have before, it just blew me away because it wasn't just like a fun, I want to, level up my experience thing. It's like a life issue that you're providing experiences that people had never had access to. That was really powerful to me.
Yeah, I mean, when you get to be my age, it's great. Like, I love building products and experiences for people, but you want to have an impact, right? And so, to the extent that a technology can help people, that's a huge thing for me. So early on, I knew that the deaf community was going to be critical in the development of this product, and so I found a guy named Antoine Hunter who runs the International Deaf Dance Festival, and I almost like cyber stalked him. I'm like, you need to talk to me. Like, we need your help. You should
Wow.
help us tune this.
Yeah.
And he was like, wow, what a way to flip the script. Usually people come to me and say, I can help you, but you're asking me for my help. Like, you're validating me. And so he was really like excited. And so he helped us tune the shoes and into the way that he wanted to hear them. And what was interesting is that I thought, wow, well, what his tuning are going to be is so different than a hearing person, but not really. Right. He really wanted the same thing. Like, the way he wanted to experience music in his body was the same way that someone who is hearing wants to experience music. The other thing that we've done a lot of work with, so they've become Antoine and Shaheem Sanchez, who's a very well-known sort of LA deaf dancer. They have really been instrumental in sort of giving us feedback and really beta testing. And Antoine uses the shoes with his community, his dance company, and they can all dance together now. They don't have to like memorize vibrational patterns on a speaker and then go back and try and translate them. They can feel it and dance with it. So the other thing that's been really interesting for us is one of our advisors came in, and he was a drummer in New York in the 80s, and he's a big EMDR therapist. And EMDR is bilateral stimulation. It's used a lot for PTSD and trauma.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he said, well, wow, these shoes deliver audio and stereo. So could I remap these and deliver like EMDR vibrational patterns for people?
Wow.
And we said, yeah, that's software. So we did a version of the app for him. He ran a study with his patients. They were like, this is incredible. So now these shoes are getting deployed. So we have a version of the app for EMDR therapists, and we're getting deployed into a bunch of different recovery centers.
That's
So the whole idea
incredible.
of like when you're going through trauma recovery, you want to crawl out of your body, and this really grounds you, it puts you back in your body. And the other thing is we have a partnership with a huge that we'll be announcing in the next couple of weeks, one of the largest human performance companies, and they see this as they're like, wow, this idea of putting vibration and sort of audio into your body, we think it's going to help people achieve flow state faster.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
so they've run a bunch of studies with their neuroscientists who said, and he actually works with the head of the Canadian ski and snowboard team.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually can test people when they get into flow state, these athletes, your brain fires at a different frequency. So it's
No
usually
way.
between 40 and 50. And so when you achieve that frequency, a drone starts flying so that you can start to understand and we can see, okay, they're in flow state. And then that's the whole idea around muscle memory. Like, how do you get to that state, right? And that's the whole idea of like when time stops and you're just so immersed in this situation. So what he's done with our shoes is said, when you add that sensory element to whatever you're listening to or seeing, it induces flow state faster than if you don't, which makes sense because it's really brain science, right? And this is a lot of the study of haptics. When you're getting three inputs that are correlated and time aligned, your brain becomes stitching software and says, well, I see it, hear it, and feel it. It's all reinforcing the same information. My brain is being flooded with signals, so it must be happening. It must be real. And that's presence. And presence is a very interesting word because presence is the holy grail for VR, right? If you have presence, but it's also the holy grail for mindfulness.
Oh, interesting.
Right, being present. So there's just a lot of really interesting things that this kind of technology opens up.
When you were first starting joining DropLab, did you ever think that it was going to touch these human issues, or were you thinking I'm starting a cool shoe company?
No, I had hoped. When I saw the technology by the inventor who came up with the idea, and he was a musician, so he saw it as a way to really connect back to music, which people are always. That's the way. Crank my music as loud as I can because I want to be able to feel it.
Right.
And I started knowing when I started seeing people's reaction to the tech, I'm like, there's more here. There's more here. I want to understand what's happening. That the A/B on this thing is really powerful. It's like going from black and white to Technicolor. And so it became this journey of, okay, what's really happening and looking at a lot of the neuroscience and like what's happening in people's bodies. And then the other thing that obviously started emerging was gaming. Gaming just exploded during this whole process. And so we started leaning very heavily into gaming because for me, I was like, gamers are driving so much of not just culture. I mean, they're driving culture, everything, but they're also driving software development faster than anyone else. And so if you really are building an integrated software platform, everything you want to do on the health and human performance side will be a subset of gaming, which will be your superset. And so that's really, as we start with music as the onboarding inspiration, the two big opportunities are really around gaming and around human performance.
Yeah, when I was wearing the shoes for the first time, I played Call of Duty a little bit, but then I started watching Call of Duty streams. And it was super, and even like VOD videos on YouTube. And it was super cool because watching those streams, it just made me feel even more engaged because I was watching, Scump from former Huntsman, now Optic. He's playing and I'm feeling the vibrations.
Scump is doing a demo with us tomorrow. He's actually demoing the shoes tomorrow.
Is that right? That's awesome. I mean, you can't pick a better guy to do it.
He's the nicest guy in the world. Yeah.
It's incredible. Well, you've talked a lot about helping people with your product. I wanted to discuss something that I think will really help our audience. And we talked about this a little bit before the podcast, but is when you're about to go into a major venture like you did with DropLabs, the planning at the beginning. We talked about how it's cool to tell people what you're going to do, right? It's a lot of fun to get excited about what you're going to do, but then you dive into it, then you have to do the work. And it's just completely different experience, the planning versus the executing. Talk a little bit about that and maybe some tips on what can set our audience up for success as they go through that process.
I mean, obviously planning is the beginning's really fun, right? And it's exciting and you're starting something and then the work happens. And the work is so much more than you could ever imagine in any company, right? It's something that, and every best laid plans, right? Because your plans are going to shift constantly. And it's how you recover. That's resilience, right? How you recover from those shifts, things that control, maybe blind spots or mistakes you potentially make, or things out of your control. Like you can do everything right, but there still could be some you couldn't foresee, like, COVID-19, things like that. So and what it really means, and this is a lot, they talk a lot about, you have to be prepared for one. It's very lonely to start a company and run a company. It just is. People would tell me that, and I was like, yeah, I get it, but you don't really get it until you're in it. And people can say like having a kid is like different, but you don't really understand it until you have a kid, right? So it's just like, it's like you've crossed the chasm and you're like in it now. It is absolutely critical that you find balance, ways you can because it will make you more creative, because burnout is real. Burnout happens a lot. Right. And so, and if you're working 24/7, and I will say the Gen Zs, I think are going to be better about this than some of the Xers and even some of the millennials. It was like working like nonstop was a badge of honor, right? Like I slept at the office during. I've never seen a generation that embraces self-care, and thank God, the way that like Gen Z does. Like it's no longer like self-care is important. It's valued. It's not something that's like, that you talk about, like if you're in therapy, you embrace it. And, which was not really talked about, 20 years ago.
Sure.
So this generation is probably better set up for having boundaries in a way that I think maybe previous generations weren't as good about.
Yeah.
I'm introducing Tracy after me. So when you talk to Tracy about boundaries, because I think, she and I were, we were women starting companies. And so you tend to you want to over deliver because you're not representing yourself. You're representing other female, executives and people that are running companies. So you work so hard. But it's really critical for anyone starting a company to set up your boundaries, also set up a support system. Is it your friends, is it your family? Make sure that you have time and you have people around you that you can go to when things are tough. Get a coach if you want to coach. But again, you need people in your corner because it's you fighting the fight every day, and that gets really tiring.
Those are all great points. I started my own company 4 months ago. So brand new with that. But I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. My first month of doing it, I was just working myself to the bone, from the morning I waking up early, going to bed late, and just working the whole time. I was exhausted by the end of every week. Physically, I couldn't do it anymore. I need those weekends just to crash. And I have a coach. It's been tremendously helpful to have a coach. But we talked a lot about, it's not the hours you put in as much as what you put into the hours. And so what I've noticed, I work from home like a lot of us do nowadays. And if I start work at 7 a.m., once I get to, it depends on the day. I get to 6 p.m. or I get to 7 p.m. So you're still getting quite a few hours in. Yeah. But if I work past that, I'm not being productive. I could work till 9 and I could have 3 hours that I'm not getting much done. I'm just getting tired. And then I didn't unplug. I didn't go skateboarding. I love to play pool. I have a pool table in my house. That's one of my unplugs. Or I didn't watch the funny YouTube videos that help me have a release from work. But when I do that 7 to 7 or 7 to 6.
By the way, there's something.
What's that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's so funny is you're almost apologizing for working a 12-hour day. Do you know what I mean? It's and that's what's just hilarious. And that's where the US is insane, right? Yeah. I mean, you think about most of the countries in the world, they really if you only worked from 7 to 5, what would happen? Do you know what I mean? Or 7 to 4, would your business go sideways? I doubt it, right? And so it's just funny the way we are here in the States to we should at least do 10 to 12 hours a day. Well, but I don't know, is that healthy? I don't know, right? It's do more with less.
Yeah. And I think part of it is understanding what you're like too. So I'm somebody who I need a lot of sleep. That you do have those people who sleep for 4 hours or 6 hours. I need at least 8. If I'm not getting 8, I'm dead the next day. And then I'm kind of screwed up for the next day, if you will.
Right.
Right. And I think giving yourself permission to be who you are, um, how you're wired. Are you wired for instance, in the morning I get a ton of stuff done. In the afternoon, that's when I need to do my phone calls because I'm not as focused on getting work, tasks, emails, documents, programs written. I think a lot of power comes from being okay with what you're like, the way you're wired, and then leveraging that to your best potential.
And that's actually a really good point because especially for people who are starting a company, you really need to know yourself and you know what you're good at and what you're not good at because what you're going to hire for. And that's like one of the trickiest things at a company. And that's like been things like we've all made mistakes, right?
Right.
Understanding who you're hiring, what their skills are, how those skills complement you or not.
Yeah.
Right. And even if they have the skills that might complement you, do they have the communication style that you can have? Right. So like some people like need a lot of communication. They need to know what's going on all the time. They get very frustrated if they don't. Some
Sure.
people are like, go do your thing, report back to me every week. So really understanding the personality as much as the skill set. So like, is communication going to be successful?
Yes.
I know we've all worked with people in the past, like, well, they're great at what they do, but but I couldn't work with them for whatever reason, just
Right.
because it was a different style. So it's really understanding how, one, who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then how you also like to receive information. I found that like
Good
a
point.
lot of people, and it's funny, it's saying like, well, is that a big deal? It is a big deal because if you're running a business based on and making decisions based on information, so how you need that information, how people can communicate becomes really important, especially as you scale.
Great points. We're gonna wrap this up in just a few minutes. We're near the end here. Is there anything that we have coming in this industry? Insights on future innovation. What do people who are watching this podcast? What should they know that's coming next?
I mean, everything's coming next, right? Because it's just like a tsunami of innovation is sort of washing over as like the rules of the book have changed. I mean, and I go back to gaming a lot, right? Gaming has changed culture, right? Like if you look at like my son's first concert was Travis Scott in Fortnite. I mean, I went to a physical concert. He didn't. And he had the
Wow,
same
good
experience
point.
as a concert, but that was a concert to him.
Yeah.
So if you think about all these platforms merging together and so gaming is now not gaming, it's entertainment. And the pandemic has shown us that virtual entertainment is not going away. It's only going to scale. Look at something like Little Michaela, virtual influencers, right? They never get tired. They can be everywhere. They don't go into rehab. Like they're around.
Yeah.
So you will see more and more of the world virtualized. That's a great opportunity for companies like us and others that are kind of thinking about like, well, how do you feel these experiences? Like they still need to feel real. We still are tactical beings.
Right.
I've also seen, I think there'll be another revolution. I'm seeing stuff around textiles and fabrics and wearables. I think will come with new battery technology that's on the horizon, with new ways to weave fibers and electronics and lights into textiles. That's going to be a big innovation you're going to see is that look at something like a Whoop band. You're not going to need to buy a physical band. It's going to be all wired into everything that you wear.
Right. I love it. I feel like I learned a ton here.
A lot of biometrics are going to be huge and you just get bigger and bigger and more. It's just, it's a higher level of integration will come down the pike, like more and more and more. So everything that you're physically wearing or dealing with will give you information about your health, your biometrics, will give you entertainment data, will understand your behavior patterns. So your whole experience is just be more and more customized to you as you go throughout your day.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm excited just to see it happen. I'm excited to be close to people like you who are making it happen. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like people to know to follow DropLabs, to follow you?
Follow us on Instagram. And I don't run our Instagram because I'm not cool enough, but I have an amazing marketing team that, and listen, I'd love for people to try this tech. I think it's incredibly innovative. People absolutely love it. And if you don't like it, you can return it. You can
Absolutely.
at least have the unboxing experience.
Exactly.
That is pretty awesome. But for me, it's like, I want people to have this experience, because if this tech can make people happier and enjoy gaming or music or movies or meditation or whatever, that that's a win right there. There's been a lot of unhappiness in the world,
Yeah.
especially now, and especially like living in Los Angeles, what we're living through right now. Anything that can help people decompress, can help them kind of get out of their head and into their body, is something that's really helpful now. So give it a try. DropLabs.com or at DropLabs.
Yeah, if anybody has the experience that I had, it's going to be a very positive one. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you've done in this industry. Thank you for taking the time to share all your insights with us today. And it's been a pleasure having you on the DLC Drop podcast.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Futuri Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.